So we are now in lesson 8, perspectives of crime causation in our subject theories of crime causation. For those who are new in this channel, you are invited to subscribe by clicking the subscribe button and also clicking the notification bell. And to understand the discussion, you should watch the earlier video because this is just a continuation of the previous videos that we have. By the way, for those who are new in this channel, your lecturer is Darlito Bernard G. Delizo, known as Sir D, Tatay D, or Dr. D. At the end of this lesson, it is expected that the learners are or should be able to explain the perspectives of crime causation and to identify what perspective is as on a given scenario. And what are the perspectives of crime causation? Well, we have so many perspectives. These are the common perspectives. You have the classical, which we have already discussed earlier, the biological, the process, the conflict, the biosocial, and the psychological perspectives. The classical perspectives, crime is considered as a product of situational forces. So, situational forces in the sense that there are factors causing a person to commit a crime. Of course, in the classical, Beccaria said that it is governed by free will, or man choose to commit a crime, or man chooses his behavior and he should be responsible for that. But other classicalists pointed out that aside from free will, you should consider also other situations that may affected or that could have affected the free will of the person in committing a crime. So, in classical theory to include neoclassical, crime is a function of the free will of an individual and the personal choice of that individual by, of course, applying what you call the hedonistic calculus. So, in the classical perspectives, punishment was considered as a deterrence, or we call it punishment is given to deter the occurrence of crime. And we have two kinds of deterrence as a review. You have the general and the specific. It's a general because it is for the society. It will serve as an example that if a person is incarcerated or imprisoned, it will serve as an example to others so that others may not commit the same crime or may not commit crimes. On the other hand, it's specific because incarcerating a person, you are incapacitating him to commit a crime, meaning he is no longer he has no longer the capacity to commit a crime because he is trained inside the prison or the jail. And further, Beccaria said that a punishment to have a deterrent effect or so that it can stop the occurrence of crime, then the punishment should be swift, it should be certain, it should be severe. And what does it mean by a punishment should be swift or it should follow the celerity? Well, the punishment, if that is delayed, then it will not give any deterrent effect, or it has no deterrent effect because you are delaying the punishment. So it should be that the punishment should be given or it should be meted right away so that it can deter other people from committing the crime or from committing a crime. Just like in the country, death penalty is not successful in this country, was not successful in this country since, shall we say, since the time of the independence of the Philippine Republic. Why? Because when a person is convicted to die, or when a person is convicted by death penalty, the punishment or the execution of the person is not done right away. Unlike in other countries, that if you are convicted of a death penalty, you just count a number of days, and that person will be executed right away in the eyes of the public, but not in our country. In our country, it will take months or even years before a person is uh, executed. Okay, and there are also instances that instead of executing that person, eventually, with the intervention of some people or some individuals, the president may move to commute to life sentence the penalty of the person or life imprisonment. So, uh, a punishment should be meted in a very short period of time after the commission of crimes or conviction of the accused so that it will serve as an example to would-be criminals. What else? Punishment is considered as certain when people will be aware or they will learn that surely they will be punished. Say, for example, if there are theft in your barangay and they were caught or they were caught but not punished, then eventually that person will become a recidivist because in his mind he will think that anyway he is not being punished or he will not be punished anyway if he's going to be caught once again. It will also give an idea to other would-be violators that once they learn that a person committed a crime and yet he was not punished by the barangay officials, then eventually other people will have that guts or courage to commit also the crime in with that particular thoughts, no, in their mind. So people must know they will be punished for their illegal behavior, that they cannot evade the strong arms of the law, that no one may take as substitute for the punishment of the one who violated the law. What about severity or proportionality or the principle of proportionality? It was already discussed that a punishment to have a deterrent effect, it should be severe enough to outweigh the rewards of the illegal action. Say, for example, if I will be uh, I will be caught stealing 20,000 pesos and my penalty would only be around 20,000 pesos and below, and I will be in prison for only a few months, then I would say that the punishment is not severe enough. So I could endure the hardship, and I'm going to take again the risk of stealing money because anyway the punishment is not that severe. And of course, the proportionality are sometimes at odds, especially since each person is different in terms of what constitutes a severe punishment. What does it mean by that? There are instances that you need to consider also. We call it the uh, the circumstances why a person committed a crime. So severe enough to outweigh the rewards of the illegal action, and severity and proportionality are sometimes at odds, especially since each person is different in terms of what constitutes a severe punishment. In other words, there are some person who, say for example, the recidivists or the repeat offenders, to them, if they will be incarcerated for a year or 2 years, they are already tolerant on that thing. No? They are already immune to that kind of difficulty. So to them, it will just be okay if they are going to commit again another crime, and eventually the penalty will be the same. That's why the proportionality should be the repeat offenders should be meted with a double penalty, or it should be meted with a higher degree of penalty than the previous incarceration. It is also stressed out that crime problem could be traced not to bad people but to bad laws. In other words, if we have a bad law, just like say the anti-graft and corruption law or the plunder law in the country, public officials can easily get away from that particular law because they are going to uh, they are going to malverse public funds below the minimum amount of imprisonment for that plunder case. So there are so many people who keep on violating the laws of the land because of the bad laws that we have. Just like what is happening today, uh, with the Makabayan Black, who are suspected to be, we call it, the cuddlers of the New People's Army. So they would like to bring the charges in the court rather than airing their side over the media. So Ka Eric said that, the Makabayan Blacks and all the communist leaning congressmen and other people in the society, they do not want to speak in the public through the media, and they would like to bring the charges in the court because they know that the technicalities of the court is different from the technicalities when they are interviewed in the media. So they would like to bring it to the court so that they can get away from those charges, because in the court, uh, they need to follow, or we need to follow the stringent procedure of the law of evidence and other procedures uh, of our court. So by doing so, they can get away from those allegations against them. So they would rather talk in the court rather than in the media, and that is why the Makabayan Black, as well as the Communist Party of the Philippines, is not, we call it, or could not stop by the government because of the bad laws that we have. Okay, so those are the deterrence principles of punishment. Beccaria believed that if individuals know that their undesirable acts will be punished, they will refrain from offending in the future. This concept emphasizes that punishment should be, so they believe and they know that they will be punished. So what is that principle? Well, that is the certainty of punishment. So what about the biological perspectives? The biological perspective, before Lombroso, there were already people who started studying about the possibility of criminal behavior as an inherent character. And to Cesar Lombroso, he mentioned about the born criminal and the atavis and the criminaloids who should be, or who are supposed to be born with the criminal attributes, as can be gleaned from their physical characteristics. And in this biological perspective, crime is the product of internal forces. Okay, just like it is already a disease or a part of the criminal's genes. Okay, so just like kleptomania is a persistent neurotic impulse. So they came to find out, scientists came to find out, medical experts came to find out that a kleptomaniac is actually suffering from neurotic impulse. And that neurotic impulse, accordingly, is part of the biological structure of that person. Okay, so kleptomaniac are those people who persistently steal anything that they could get. And crime is a function of chemical, neurological, genetic, personality, intelligence, or mental traits. So, in the biological perspective, people are talking of the possibility that once a person is exposed to certain chemicals, or about the things that we eat, some believe that some of the foods that we eat will cause aggressiveness in our behavior, and others believe that it could be, we call it, based on the uh, on the brain cells of a person and the genes of the person, as well as the personality. And some believe that there is a relationship between low IQ and criminal behavior. And the focus of the study in biological perspectives is mainly on the individual person itself, and it may answer the question of why a person becomes a criminal. So the what is being sought by biological perspective is that trying to answer why a person becomes a criminal, and the direct answer of biological perspective is that it is because of his biological and physiological structure. Of course, with the specific theories under biological perspectives, We are going to discuss them later on in this subject. So these are the some of the biological theories or biological perspective: the phrenology, the study of the skulls, the criminal families, the psychobiological, the somatotyping, and the atavism theory. We are going to discuss them later on comprehensively. On the process perspective, this is referring to a crime as a product of socialization or interaction. So crime as a product of a person became a criminal because he is nurtured or he was nurtured by the society because of the processes of the society. As to the specific social process theories, we are going to discuss them again later on. So, in the process perspective, crime is a function of upbringing, the learning and control. And parents, teachers, environment, the mass media, and peer groups may influence the behavior. So, something like your behavior today is processed by the kind of interaction or socialization that you have gone through from elementary to high school and in college. Just like you are, if you are still a criminology student, once you enter the tri-bureau, then eventually, by the process of socialization and interaction and learning inside the tri-bureau, eventually your behavior will also change. So, the process of development of human behavior is almost the same as the process of the development of criminal behavior. So, in the process perspective, it concerns on how a person becomes a criminal. So, the question is how. On the other hand, in biological is what makes a person criminal, but in process perspective, it is concerned on the how a person becomes a criminal. So this is an example of in your module you have this kind of picture that these people became criminal because they are associated with one another. So that is the differential association theory of Edwin Sutherland. A chronic offender's criminal behavior is best explained by what perspective of crime causation. So chronic, okay, offenders' criminal behavior is best explained by what perspective of crime causation. That is what you call the process perspective. So, why process? What is chronic anyway? When you say chronic, it is a continuing or occurring again and again for a long time. Or, if you say chronic poisoning, you have eaten a poison today, it will take a long time before you can feel the effect of that. So, chronic. When you say chronic ailment, that is already an ailment for a long time. If that is chronic poisoning, the poisoning or the effect of the poisoning comes later. Okay? So, something like your behavior is nurtured after years of interacting with people. So, that's the idea of process or chronic. So, a chronic offender basically is a persistent and consistent breaker of the law for a long period of time. So that's a chronic offender. So he became now, we call it an offender later on in later on the later part of his life because by the process of the society. So the process perspective includes the social learning, the social control process, and the social reaction. Criminal behavior can be caused by the social learning, by the social control that we have, and by the social interaction. Again, with the specific theories of crime causation on the social process perspective, we are going to discuss them later on in later videos. Number 15, autistics manifest variety of emotional moods. Some are tender-hearted and excessively kind. So there are autistics who are very kind. There are also autistics who are very aggressive. If an autistic commits a crime, the perspective on crime causation explain the criminal act as what you call a biological because the shortness of the temperament of the person or the aggressiveness of the person is believed to have been part of his genes, or it could have been inherited by that autistic. And what is an autistic? An autistic or autistism normally runs in the families. So certain combinations of genes may increase a child risk. Autism runs in families, so certain combinations of genes may increase a risk, or autistic is a person who is suffering, we call it the shortness of rationality. So what about conflict perspective? Conflict perspective is something to do with, we call it friction between two groups of people. And practically in conflict perspective, it talks about theories on the economic and political friction in the society. That accordingly, crimes are caused by economic and political forces. And crime is a function of competition for limited resources and power. So it talks about people commits crime because of lack of opportunity. So they tend to uh, deviate to illegal means of creating an income. And in the conflict perspective, it is believed that the ruling class is in conflict with the lower class, and the laws are manipulated by the ruling class so that they can overpower or control the lower class. So there are some people who believe that the poor people are forced to commit crime because of the unfavorable law towards them. And crime is politically defined concept, meaning it is not legal in some aspect, but rather in the conflict theory, they believe that crimes is a product of politicking. So in the conflict perspective, it's just like this. So theories, or those who believe in the conflict theories, believe that uh, the capitalists in the government or the wealthy people, laws are more favorable to them, so they have more gains and revenues, and they are wealthier than the other working class. The working class, accordingly, their wages, their benefits, and opportunities are lighter than those accorded to the wealthy people. That's why there is what you call an ongoing conflict. So, accordingly, the working class are uh, forced to commit crimes against property because of inequality in the distribution of economic wealth. Again, with regard to the specific theories under the conflict perspective, we are going to discuss that later on in this subject. The biosocial perspective, from the word bio and the social. Okay. It explains the onset of antisocial behavior such as aggression and violence by focusing on the physical qualities of the offender. Meaning, the biosocial perspective believe that somehow in our genes, in our physiological structure, there is that tendency to be aggressive. And that aggressiveness can either be manifested, okay, if the social situation is unfavorable, but it can be repressed or stopped if the social condition is favorable. Okay, something like we have the the tendency to cheat in our exam or during our examination. However, you cannot cheat because the teacher is very strict and no one cheats in the classroom. But once the teacher is not strict, and most of the members of the class are cheating, eventually, okay, because of that biological urge for you to cheat, so uh, you will become a cheater in that subject. Okay, so three areas of focus in here: the biochemical, the things, the food that we eat, our genes, also our hormones, and some other environmental contaminants or radiation that may cause aggressiveness on the person or to become violent. Neurological, it has something to do with any brain damages and the genes that we have, the things that we inherit, in addition to the social factors. So that is the biosocial perspectives. So these are we call it the sum of the biological perspective, that the coping skills and criminal behavior. When you say coping skills, there are people who can cope up with the society and their physiological structure. So they tend not to commit a crime. But there are some people who are overcome by their biological urges and by the societal conditions. That's why they are forced to commit criminal activities. So what are these? The biological vulnerabilities. Again, your genetic predisposition, meaning ang pamilya mo ay pamilya ng mga maiinit ang ulo. Okay? So, ganun yon. Or innate sensitivities, meaning ikaw ay likas na, ano ba yon? Tawag natin likas na sensitibo. Ikaw ay pusong mamon. Or meron ka ng existing na mental disorder. So, these are some of the biological vulnerabilities. Tapos, inilagay ka ba doon sa very stressful na social organization or sa isang culture na very stressful at saka media, ang tendency nun ay maaari ka ng ma-force na mag-commit ng crime. What about the psychological vulnerabilities? Kaya yan na yung personality mo na maaring part ng minana mo, your temperament, your negative thinking, and your self-defeating belief. So, it would be dependent now on your coping skills. So, just like in the insights of Abraham Sen, that your resistance, if that is greater the by the temptation and by the situation, then you will not be committing a crime. But if your degree of resistance is lesser than the tendency, the temptation, as well as the situation, well, the probability is that you will be committing a crime. So, that is biosocial perspective. No, but in biosocial, as opposed to the crime formula of Abrahamsen, in biosocial, it gives more weight on the biological aspect and social aspect of why a person became a criminal. What about psychological perspectives? Psychological, again, criminal behavior is a product of unconscious forces within a person's mind. So we discussed in the earlier part of the subject about the function of the mind, the unconscious, the conscious mind, okay, and the subconscious mind. That in psychological perspective, they believe that whatever behavior you have is a product of the things that you are thinking or anything that is in your mind. So conflict occurs at various psychosexual stages of development, okay, that might have an impact on an individual's ability to operate normally as an adult. So something like the being a necrophilia, being a pedophilia. Okay, some believes that these sexual abnormalities are caused by the failure of that individual or that person to overcome, okay, those stresses during his psychosexual stage of life. So psychosexual, that is now the stage of human life in which a person began to feel some sexual urge as well as began to think about sexual relationship. If the aggressive impulse is not controlled or is repressed to an unusual degree, some oppression now can leak out of the unconscious and a person can engage in random acts of violence. So, uh, uh, the psychological perspective believers, okay, assumes that whatever aggressions or violence that a person commits is actually a product of his failure to cope up, okay, with the things, the stressful things that is running in his mind. Okay, so that is what you call psychological perspective, that somehow the violence and the aggression that a person commits comes from his thinking or from his mind. So, what is the common perspective that explains the cause of crime? When you say common, ito yung pinakamaraming dahilan bakit may mga nagkukomit ng crime. In reality, class, there is none. There is no common perspective that explains the cause of crime. That's why we have what you call the multi-causal approach. Anong ibig sabihin ng multi-causal approach? Sinasabi doon ng isang kriminal ay naging kriminal kaysa napakaraming attributions or factors. So, hindi lamang isa yung factor na nag-cause bakit siya nag-commit ng crime, but rather a combination of multiple factors kaya naging kriminal yung isang tao. Today, poverty, parental neglect, low self-esteem, alcohol, drug abuse, and other experiences in life can be connected to why people develops a criminal behavior. Okay? So, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and again, please subscribe this channel if you have not yet subscribed. So, thank you once again, and God bless you all.